Who was the Zodiac Killer? The Zodiac Killer is a famed serial murderer whose crimes haunted the northern coast of California in the late 1960s. The Zodiac Killer is well known for the cryptic messages he sent to the media, taunting law enforcement and reporters alike with ciphers and graphic descriptions of his crimes. There are 5 murders connected to the Zodiac Killer, although he claimed in communications he had killed as many as 37 people. His confirmed victims include David Arthur Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, Cecilia Ann Shepard, Paul Lee Stein and Darlene Elizabeth Farron. The Zodiac was known to target couples, attacking 3 separate young pairs in his killing spree, although 2 of the male victims survived. In 1969, after his second attack, the Zodiac called the police to report the crime himself and to claim responsibility for a previous double homicide. Though the Zodiac was never caught and the official investigation remains open, but public interest has remained high. Countless theories have gained traction over the years, pointing a finger at various men who share physical markers or specific interests with the famed killer. Why do we still care? Dr. Harold Schechter, a literature professor and author who specializes in serial killers, says, "It's the mythology of him. That he sent letters to the press is only part of it. It's not that unusual for serial killers to write taunting letters to the press and authorities, adding that it feeds their megalomania. It was the content of the letters, the ciphers, that made the Zodiac Killer unique. He created the lore on purpose," Schechter says, wearing a costume in one of his killings, using a particular symbol and dubbing himself Zodiac. In general, when a serial killer is on the loose, it taps into these very primitive, almost childlike fears, like the monster in the closet kind of thing. The Zodiac played into that. There are plenty of serial killers who don't want to be caught, but then there are those whose megalomania feeds a sort of desire to be a comic book villain. What was the Zodiac Killer's real name? The true identity of the Zodiac Killer has never been confirmed by law enforcement, though several suspects have been identified over the years. Who was Arthur Lee Allen? Arthur Lee Allen, a schoolteacher in Vallejo, California, is the only suspect to be publicly named by authorities in the case of the Zodiac Killer. Allen was institutionalized for sexually abusing children in 1975. He was never officially identified as the Zodiac Killer. Who is the new Zodiac suspect? In 2022, author Jarrett Kobeck laid out a case against Paul Dorr, a naval documents clerk from Fairfield, California, asserting he was the true Zodiac Killer. Dorr, who died in 2007, emerged as the most likely suspect in Kobeck's book How to Find Zodiac. Kobeck's theory rests on various shared passions both Dorr and the Zodiac seem to have, in particular an interest in home-making a bomb, particularly with ammonium nitrate and fertilizer. Both men had outlined instructions for the formation of such a bomb in their writings. Kobeck additionally points to age, height and physical appearance as data points that would support Dorr being the infamous killer. Along with the fact that Dorr was an employee at a shipyard in Vallejo at the time of the murders. When was the last Zodiac killing? The last murder confirmed to have been committed by the Zodiac Killer was on October 11, 1969. The killing, which took place in San Francisco, claimed the life of Paul Stein, a 28-year-old taxi driver. Stein had picked up a passenger, now known to be the Zodiac, who was headed for the Presidio Heights neighborhood. Stein was shot in the head. The police radio broadcast reporting the incident wrongly classified the suspect as a black man, leading to the responding officers releasing a white man who matched the description given by witnesses. Later, the San Francisco Chronicle received a letter from the Zodiac claiming responsibility for the murder and containing a bloody scrap from Stein's shirt. How was Gary Post identified? Gary Francis Post is one of the many names to be floated as a possible Zodiac Killer suspect over the years. In 2021, Casebreakers, an independent investigative group made up of some 40 former law enforcement officials, academics, journalists, and former military intelligence workers, announced they had cracked one of the most famed cold cases in history. Gary Post, they asserted, was the Zodiac Killer. Their claims rely largely on DNA evidence found at the scene of Sherry Jo Bates' murder in 1966, which they say is a match for Post. The only problem? Police remain adamant that Bates is not a confirmed victim of the Zodiac killer and that Post is not a current suspect in the case. Casebreakers also assert that Post, who died in 2018, shares a shoe size and unique forehead scars with the Zodiac killer. The letters sent to the press, they say, also contain anagrams of Post's name. Was the Zodiac killer ever caught? No. The investigation into the murders carried out by the Zodiac killer in the late 1960s remains open. Why is the Zodiac killer called the Zodiac killer? Zodiac is a self-given name. The notorious serial killer began contacting the press in 1969, sending now-famous ciphers to local newspapers, accompanied by letters to the editor claiming responsibility for various murders and threatening more. Is the Zodiac killer still alive? Since the Zodiac killer has never been officially identified, it cannot be said for certain if they are still alive. Their communication with media did, however, cease in the late 70s, and no additional murders have been linked to the killer in recent years.